The Sahara is a lot bigger than you think. If you theoretically had to walk from one end to the other, it'd be farther than hiking from Maine to Washington. Imagine a giant sandbox the size of the United States that barely anybody lives in. That's the Sahara. The existence of this desert is not really given much thought. It's an ocean of sand. And just like any ocean, historically the people that learned to sail it made use of it, and those that couldn't stayed on the shoreline. The Sahara apparently goes through dry and wet periods. Every 20,000 years or so, rain comes back to North Africa. The Sahara wasteland transforms into a prosperous grassland. Then soon the region dries back up again and the desert returns. What we live in is a dry period. Ever since humans have had agriculture, we've never seen a green Sahara. But there is evidence 9,000 years ago, there were many people that did. They lived and prospered here. When the rains went away in the span of only 2 centuries, it was basically the apocalypse for them. Their homeland was dying, and all life migrated to greener pastures as the desert returned. But what if in an alternate timeline, it didn't? What if the Sahara never dried up, and instead we see a fertile North Africa today? Cody, you say, this is quite scientifically inaccurate. The Sahara turned into a desert because the rains disappeared due to the Earth's axis, and to that, Jimmy, I agree with you. This is simply a thought exercise. Not every single climate factor needs to be brought up. I just really wanted to imagine the world. So just take it in, I guess. This video is going to be a lot more general than I usually do. This is more involving historical themes like river civilizations than specific historical events. And so don't imagine I think my ideas are the only path that could have happened. This is spanning a big distance of time and land. So think of this as fun with maps, and my personal best guess into what I think could have happened. That's all. Also, special thanks to Sean McKnight for his fantastic map involving a green Sahara, which was the major inspiration for the topic. This map is what I'm basing my scenario in my maps on, so check out his page in the link below. Let's go back to an alternate 7000 BC. The rain always pours down in the Sahara, and the region simply doesn't dry up. You could imagine great rivers flowing into massive freshwater lakes larger than the Great Lakes. Let's call them, Lake Chad, Lake Fazan, Lake Maghreb. Deeming these lakes does a bit of a disservice to them. These freshwater bodies are more like seas, like the Caspian Sea. Just like it was thousands of years ago, villages dot the coastal waters. If you want to imagine how this green Sahara looks, don't think it would be a lush tropical rainforest. It'd probably be very flat and covered in grass, pretty much like the savannas of today or the Great Plains. Cave art depicted animals like elephants, giraffes, and rhinos all living in this region. The Sahara isn't simply one big flat dust bowl. It has large mountain ranges and plateaus, so these ranges, rivers, and lakes would split up the huge American-sized region into various smaller parts. So who are the people that would be living in this area? Well, upon further research, this region wouldn't be European or Arabic or even Sub-Saharan African. Instead, the people in this alternate timeline are a mixture of all 3 groups, creating a middle group between other regions. Let me explain. It's theorized that modern Berbers are a genetic mix of all 3 continents. During the wet periods in the Sahara, each time the region was green, it influenced Europeans or Asians or Africans to migrate into it, changing or contributing to the genetic makeup of the area each time. So in this alternate timeline, I'd imagine the people in this alternate Sahara would resemble modern-day Berbers, even if they aren't Berber. And going south, the people would have more sub-Saharan African features. I'd imagine the Sahara like India today, made up of multiple different ethnic groups and even races. The further south you go, the darker the features are. Most people would live around rivers and these lakes, creating cultural regions perhaps separate from one another. Just like any other region in the world, I'd imagine city-states could pop up. Now remember, everyone else exists. I don't imagine the Sahara being green affects much of ancient history. Mesopotamia, China, Persia, India, and Greece are so far away they aren't influenced by the Sahara having sand or not. But what about Egypt, you ask? Well, that's a bit trickier. Two things I theorize could occur. If Egypt still had a desert, say it's a continuation of that Middle East climate, Egyptian civilization might not be changed drastically at all. True, they'd have more invasions from the west, but otherwise, their society doesn't need to be too different. If Egypt itself, however, was green, instead of sandy deserts, it's covered in grasslands, then this fundamentally changes Egyptian society. Their farming, structure, religion, government, everything is changed. First, they are much less stable. The desert was a natural defense that kept invaders out. Second, Egypt's population looks more spread out. It doesn't need to cling to the river. The Nile is still a good river, don't get me wrong, but most resemblance from the Egypt we know and love is entirely altered. As Tigerstar even pointed out to me, the sandstone needed to construct the pyramids wouldn't exist. So say goodbye to those. Going back to the Sahara itself, there's a wide range of possibilities for the type of civilization that would live here. If the rains were consistent and people could remain stationary, I don't see why city-states couldn't form on different rivers and lakes. In less consistent regions, now pastoral herders are more prevalent. The Sahara is so large and divided by mountains, I could see all of these groups forming and divided between various societies. That's the most interesting aspect of this scenario in my opinion. A whole new region with thousands of years of political history that otherwise would have just been sand in our timeline. It'd be its own distinct cultural region or multiple cultural regions on a massive continent just as China and India were. Now, who would be the people doing the fighting? First is the natives themselves. The Sahara could be divided into various groups who'd fight over whichever reasons. Second is invaders from the south and west. Empires like Mali or Ghana, fueled by their trade of gold and ivory. Third is Mediterraneans from the north. In ancient times, this could be Carthage. I doubt Carthage would have a far larger empire in Africa, however I think its economic and cultural influence would be profound in northern Sahara. Being a generally flat region with access to rivers and lakes, political boundaries will fluctuate a lot. Yet while troops can easily cross the savannas, so too can caravans. Trade builds relationships between different people more than anything else. Even if Carthage is still salted into the earth by an angry Rome, it would have only been the first Mediterranean empire to explore relations with the rich empires to the south. In our timeline, there were trade routes in the Sahara. While trade still flowed in this region, I'd imagine a green Sahara would make the passage far more safer and more accessible. Not to mention, with another region of empires in between Europe and sub-Saharan Africa, the journey isn't as daunting. The Sahara made sub-Saharan Africa pretty mysterious to Europeans. With easier trade routes, there is a consistent flow of trade and perhaps people from all regions going across from Europe to the Sahara to sub-Saharan Africa. Africa is far more prominent in Western history by the time of the Romans. Who knows what the Romans would even do? Perhaps want their own chunk of the Sahara? What remains is the constant of trade from the Golden Coast all the way up to Britannia. Another Silk Road. Now, due to time, I don't want to dedicate 20 minutes talking about literally every single detail. Tigerstar brought up about what could happen with imperialism. However, whenever I mention that, the comment section always turns horrendous, so let's end on a happy note. In a world where the Sahara was green, this area would certainly be its own cultural region with ancient empires like China and India. The grasslands would allow for easier trade access and greater connection between Africa and Europe. If this would end in conquest or genuine beneficial contact for both, I'll leave that for you to decide. The best prediction I can make is that Africa would be included more in the histories of Europe and Asia in cooperation between all. The Sahara was like an ocean. Sure, some people could cross it, but for many, they stayed on the other side. So if such a barrier was gone, there is endless possibilities for what such a culture in such a world would arise if the Sahara had never dried up. What do you think? Like this video and subscribe to support the channel if you have not done so. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
And then I sat back up, realizing that was a stupid idea to lean back like that without thinking about how close the window was. And then you spoke, and by that point, so much had changed.
I'm just imagining Dan Carlin narrating the history of your day, and he's like, little did Tiger Star know that his day would be forever changed when his tire went flat. Tires were invented by the ancient Babylonians.
Oh, goodness.
And then over the history, we are now left in a 21st century Missouri, and Missouri was conquered in 1830 by the United States from the whatever tribe, and then this eventually has led to Tiger Star going into Walmart, a symbol of mass consumerism. And that's,
Yeah.
that's Dan Carlin.
It's lovely.